So another scenario that I want you to think about, which is not actually an experiment that you're going to do in the lab, is to think about what happens if you change the substrate concentration. So in procedure 5.4, we, with our catalase, changed the amount of catalase, right? How much of the enzyme there actually was, but we used the same amount of substrate. So what I want you to do now is kind of think about the opposite. So in that experiment, we saw that the more catalase we added, the faster the reaction. But product would eventually be exactly the same. It would just take time for the one with less catalase to catch up. So now let's think about this the other way, right? What if we have different concentrations of the substrate? Remember our substrate here, hydrogen peroxide. So in our test tubes, I've put in 1, 2, and 3 milliliters. You can kind of see those. I'll pull them out. You can see there's a different level in each, and I'm going to add in the exact same amount of catalase into each one. All right, so again, remember catalase came from our potato. I'm going to take 1 mil and put it into each one, and we're going to see after a couple, about 20 seconds, which one is produced the most bubbles. So number 3 is a couple seconds behind 1, but after a short amount of time, what we can see is that the enzyme is basically working at the same amount of speed. So all 3 of these test tubes after 20 seconds have about the same amount of product. Because remember, enzymes determine speed, not the amount of product that is made. So what we'll see if we watch this for a little while is that test tube 3 has more hydrogen peroxide. Therefore, it is going to be able to produce more bubbles in the long term. So if we stopped it right now, you can see that test tubes 1, 2, and 3 have about the same amount of product. Test tube 3 has about the same amount of oxygen bubbles as test tube 1. Now we could measure this if we want to, but well, I'm not feeling that ambitious. But what you can see is that the bubbles in test tube 1 are starting to slow down a little bit because there's not as much hydrogen peroxide in there. Test tube 2 is still going pretty well, but test tube 3 is on a roll, right? Test tube 3 is going to keep working for a very long amount of time and will definitely outpace this. So in 20 seconds, if there's the same amount of enzyme, then all 3 of these test tubes would be equal. If we allow this to go for unlimited time, right? If I let this sit for an hour, right, eventually test tube 3 is going to be producing far more product than test tube 1 because there's more starting reactant. There's more substrate here, right? You can still see that test tube 3 is still cranking because there are more hydrogen peroxide molecules in that test tube than there is in test tube 1. All right, they're going to keep going for a while. This would take time, a lot more time than I have to stare at this. And I don't know if you like watching paint dry, but I feel like this would be about the equivalent of that. Do you have enough time in your life to watch hydrogen peroxide bubble? Maybe it's a little mesmerizing. I don't know. I think I have a few better things in my life I should probably be doing besides watching these bubble. But again, what would happen eventually? Test tube 3 will make way more bubbles than test tube 1 if there is more hydrogen peroxide in test tube 3 than test tube 1, but all the test tubes have the exact same amount of catalase.